Well, good morning, everyone. So there's a couple things I wanted to say before we get started. This morning I was reading a little bit written by a Hindu mystic, and it said something so beautifully that pertains to what we talked about the previous 2 weeks. Remember, the previous 2 weeks we were talking about freedom or bondage, and that we appear to be bound because we are first free. And what the author said is that the divine plays at being bound without ever experiencing bondage. And I think that's so important for us to recognize, to put things into perspective. Because we get caught up in the seriousness of life and we lose sight of the fact that the experience that we are having here on this planet at this time, in these bodies, through these bodies, perhaps as these bodies, it is not all that there is, you see. So we might say, for example, that the human body can undergo sickness and disease and death, and that's terrible. But we never really die, you see. The flesh might experience that, the body might experience that, but it's only an experience, and it is not a permanent experience, right? It is playing at being bound without experiencing bondage. So when we find ourselves being overwhelmed with how serious this thing we call life is, we need to take a step back further and understand it's only one experience, only a experience, and what we make of it is entirely up to us. We can label it good, we can label it bad, we cannot label it at all. The second thing that I read this morning that I want to share with you before we go any further is just this one statement. And I'm paraphrasing it because it was quoted in terms that would be familiar to somebody familiar with Hinduism, but not necessarily to us. But it's to the effect that we, you and I, we live within the divine. It's everything. God is all. God is all there is. God is all around us. The air we breathe, the sun, the sunshine, all of these things are different aspects of the divine. We live in the divine so that we might discover the divine within us. The divine within us. If we take nothing else from today, remember that we are immersed in the divine. We cannot escape it. Holmes says we are like fish swimming in the ocean looking for the water. It is all around us. It is in us. It is as us, and most of our bodies are made of it. But we don't realize it. We don't have that realization. We live in the divine. We have our life in the divine. The divine has created life as us, brought that life to the point of self-awareness so that we could become aware that it is in us, it is as us, it is through us, and we are it in expression. And in part of that process of learning and growing and unfolding spiritually, in part of that process, we experience being bound, but never really are. The divine within us has never been bound. So I leave you with those things. Hold on to them, roll them over, let them work with you, see what meaning they have for you. Today we are talking about your quest for the Holy Grail, your personal quest for the Holy Grail. Wendy's quote was absolutely spot on with exactly what we were talking about. Now, you know, I enjoy stories. I love stories, and I love storytelling, and I love watching a good story in the form of a film. I love listening to a good story. I told you that when I was a kid growing up, there was a man on the radio in New York. His name was Gene Shepherd. And everybody probably remembers the movie A Christmas Story. Remember Ralphie wanted a little Red Ryder BB gun with a compass in the stock, and everybody kept telling him, "You'll put your eye out, kid." Well, that was Gene Shepherd. Gene Shepherd wrote that story. He was, in my opinion, he was one of the great American humorists, and he wrote many things, many articles, and he had this radio show when I was a kid, and it was like 15 minutes, 15 minutes a night. I think it came out at 7 o'clock in the evening. It was just on for 15 minutes. And he would start a story on Monday night. He would start telling a story. It could be anything. It could be anything. You know, he started, I was in the cafeteria, the Horn and Hard Arts cafeteria in New York City the other day, and there was this little old lady there, and he would start telling us this story about this little old lady, and he would, for 15 minutes, and then the next pick it up again, and the next day, and he would simply ramble. You would think he had no idea, you know, there was no rhyme or reason to this story. But by Friday, in the last 15 minutes, he brought the entire week all together and brought it to some humorous close that we could take away from us. And then on Saturday night, he did a 3-hour broadcast from the Limelight, which was a coffee shop, and I think later a discotheque in Greenwich Village in New York. And he just sat, you know, I couldn't see him through the radio, but I could just imagine him sitting there at the microphone, and he would just tell story after story after story, you know. Some of his favorite stories were about being in the Army in Fort Dix, New Jersey. And when I got drafted, that's where they sent me. I was in Fort Dix, New Jersey. So the whole time they had us marching around Fort Dix and crawling in the mud and all those things, all I could think of was Gene Shepherd was here 40 years before me doing the same stuff. There's something about a good story that can draw us in, and we want to talk about that a little bit, because the quest is really the story of our lives. So typically, you know, when a story is a good story, now you know that I've mentioned in the past that I did some volunteer work at the studio, and I learned a little bit about film production, TV production, and directing, and all the aspects of making video. And sometimes it's hard for me to get into the story, because I start watching the film and I'm analyzing the technical details of it. How is the lighting in this film? What's taking place with the frame that the director of cinematography decided to show us? You know, why did they choose this particular shot? And I'm not really engaged in the story. Instead, I'm engaged in the technical details. I'm analyzing, and I'm wondering what it's all about, and I'm never really quite into the story. So for me, a good story is a story that I forget all that. I even forget that I'm watching a film. You know, I am kind of drawn into that story. And if you've read Aristotle's Poetics, you know, he kind of laid out the way that a dramatic story works in our culture. And of course, he wrote it over 2,000 years ago, but it's still the model that's used today, you know. We find out a little bit of something about the normal life of the main character, the protagonist of the story, and then something happens that upends that normal life and takes them into a totally different world. And they get further and further and further away, you know, from the one thing that they wanted, that you found that at the beginning that they wanted. They seem to get pulled further and further away until it looks like there's no hope that they're going to get back. And then something happens, and either they get back or they fail, you know, either it's a success or a tragedy. But what happens to us when we are watching a story that we get drawn into is we're not just observing, we're not just analyzing the script writing, we're not just analyzing the wardrobe and all those kind of things. we become that character. We become that protagonist. We start to live vicariously. Okay? So we're not just watching, but we're thinking, well, wait a second. If I were in this situation, this is what I would do. We start to participate. like kids watching a horror movie that you scream out, "Don't go to the basement." We are in the story. And what happens is we are creating a different version of that story in our head. We're playing it out. Sometimes you even get to the end of the movie and say, "Well, I wouldn't have finished it that way. I would have written a different ending." But my point there is we are engaged. We are completely engaged in that story. And then there's another way. There's another way of looking at stories, which is to be a voyeur, not in the context of like a peeping Tom. The other definition of voyeur is a prying observer, a curious observer, someone who is watching and observing for scandal or sordid details. We're kind of watching this thing, and we're kind of watching to see what's going to happen next. And probably in terms of filmmaking, Alfred Hitchcock is my favorite director when it comes to that. If you think of his movie, The Rear Window, with Jimmy Stewart and Grace Kelly, here's this guy sitting stuck in a wheelchair because his leg is broken, and he's using his binoculars to observe lives of other people in the apartment buildings across the street. And of course he gets drawn into a great mystery, and he sees what he thinks is a murder, and amongst other things that he's watching. But here's the concept: is you and I, as the audience, sitting here observing a man who's observing other people. You see, so we become kind of watchers. We kind of become the watchers. Hitchcock was a master. He was absolutely fantastic. When I was studying filmmaking, watched on a YouTube video, suggested to watch Alfred Hitchcock's Dial M for Murder, and every time there was a movement in the camera, or there was a change in the scene, to ask what was the purpose of that? Why did that change? So I got the movie, and unfortunately the movie was shot in 3D at a time when 3D was popular. Remember, did you have your red and green glasses and you watched The Creature from the Black Lagoon in those days? So Hitchcock shot the movie in 3D, and the scenes and the shots were created to take advantage of 3D. By the time it came to market, the 3D fad was over, so it was just released in 2D. I would love to be able to see that movie in 3D and just get the full depth, literally the depth of what he was trying to show. But this movie, Dial M for Murder, was a stage play that was adapted to film, and usually stage plays don't carry over very well because a stage play is driven by dialogue, and it takes place in a very small, confined area of the stage, Whereas a movie takes place in a big, wide open spaces, and it's driven by action. But Hitchcock found a way to make it work. This entire movie takes place, well, I'd say 90% of the movie takes place in one room of an apartment. But the way he did it was by making us the camera. So as the actors are engaged in dialogue, the camera just doesn't statically stay on their face, but it might linger around the room to a place where there's a clue, you see. There's a clue for this murder mystery. And he looks all around. It looks all around. It moves up and down. It goes around behind things so that you're looking across furniture, across a table. You're there as the camera, you're moving around, but you are the observer, you see. You are the observer. And then again, just like in the movie The Rear Window, he draws you into the story, Who did this crime? Are they going to get away with it, Is a detective ever going to figure this out? All of those different things that make good filmmaking. So my point there is, of all of this, is that I think as humans, we love stories, right? Aristotle described it, why we love them, or he at least described the formula of what makes a good story thousands of years ago. So the art of storytelling, the art of bringing people in, the art of getting people engaged, it has been around for a very, very, very long time. Now this brings us to the tales of the Knights of the Round Table. Now I know that most of us are old enough, we saw the movie Camelot, and we may have even read some of the tales of the Knights of the Round Table. And the Knights of the Round Table are always going on these quests. And one of the quests is the quest for the Holy Grail. The Holy Grail. They're going off to seek the Holy Grail. And there's kind of a template to these things. And Joseph Campbell reiterated it in The Hero's Journey. And again, it follows a bit of Aristotle's Poetics, you know. But we start out, we meet the knight, we meet the protagonist, we meet the central character in their normal setting. And then they become aware of something. They become aware of something that needs to be done, something that needs to be learned, something that needs to be gained, something that needs to be done. And usually it's something that will, you know, help alleviate a condition in the town where this hero lives. And they start out on this journey, and along the way they have these guides along the way. They have these wise people, you know, the prophets, who kind of tell them, now when you get here, this is what might happen, this is what you might see, and this is what you might do to deal with that obstacle. And then they go off, and the hero goes off and meets these different challenges, you know, and must overcome these different challenges to either complete the quest or fail. And then, you know, when the hero comes back home, they have this realization, whatever they're looking for, they really had all along. And the journey was not so much an external journey as it was a journey of self-discovery. If you ever read the little booklet, Acres of Diamonds, we talked about Drummond a few weeks ago. I think Drummond actually wrote that book, Henry Drummond. And it's about a man who goes off all around the world searching for diamonds and doesn't find them, and comes home and digs in his own backyard and finds them. The same way of telling the same story. Now, some stories are just that. They are just stories. They're just entertainment. They're just things that kind of get us involved. And I think in the Spanish language we might say diversions. They distract us. They take us away from something else to do. But there are other stories that are constructed in such a way that they are more like mythology or more like fables. Now, I want to be clear, when I use the term myth, I'm not talking about a fantasy or something that's not true. I am talking about something that works at a deeper level, at a level below our conscious awareness. It works in symbols. Right? Remember, we were talking a few weeks ago about some interviews with Carl Jung that the Zoom group was watching. And Jung said, you know, this, I never heard it put quite this way, and I thought it was very interesting. He said, the conscious part of us, I want you to think of us as having separate parts, just for the sake of understanding, because we are one, yet we have the experience that we are separated from our own selves. And he said the conscious part of us cannot know directly what the subconscious part of us knows and believes and does. And yet the subconscious part of us is probably more important in determining our behavior than the conscious mind is, you know. Now, we've talked about this before, you know, when I was learning to sell, we were taught that people do not want because they have reasons. People have reasons because they want. And what they were trying to teach the salesperson is human beings are driven by unconscious impulses that they don't understand. And home this as well. And if the salesperson can figure out what that button is and push that button, then they can give the person all of the logical reasons to justify why they're buying that product. People have reasons because they want. They need a reason to justify their want. So what Jung was saying is that the conscious mind cannot directly know what the subconscious mind is doing, is thinking, is believing directly, but it knows through the symbols. And the aspect of a story that works in the symbols, the mythology, I think the way that I understand it is that works with the symbols, that works with the subconscious in the terms of symbols. So, you've all read Aesop's fables, and about the sour grapes, and we understand that, it's not just an entertaining story about a wolf that couldn't reach the grapes. It's telling us, something about ourselves, speaking to us in a symbolic level. That sometimes we want something, and if we can't get it, then we decide it wasn't any good anyway. Sour. And the great teachers of all ages have taught us in parables, have taught us in symbolism, have given us an image to take away. You may remember I mention this quite often. Vernon Howard, who was a Unity minister down out of Atlanta, he wrote a book called Psychopictography by Vernon Howard. If you haven't read it, see if you can get it at the library. It is a little book that is just full of very short stories that are designed to create a visual image. And what Howard was saying in that book is that we remember the image, we remember the imagery of the story, which carries the message. We remember that long after we've forgotten the words of the story. So here's the opening story that he gives us in that book, and I just want you to experience it one more time. So think of a long, long time ago in a far, far away place. And there's this little boy, and he wanders too far away from his home, right? Again, now we get a cautionary tale. It's not just a story, it's something that's teaching children, don't wander too far away from home. But this little boy, he wanders too far away from his home. He's about 5 years old, and he gets up near a road. And there's some strangers passing by in a covered wagon, and they snatch up this little boy and they throw him in the back of the covered wagon. And all he can hear as the covered wagon is leaving, he can hear the squeaky wheels of the wagon. And he hears the church bell in his little village. He hears the church bell pealing. And the wagon carries him away, and these people, they make him into their servant. They make him work for them. And wherever they go in their travels, they're wanderers, and wherever they go in their travels, they kind of used him to do the manual labor against his will. And one day he came of age. He was like 17 years old, and he realized he didn't have to stay with them, that he could escape from them. But he didn't know where he was. He didn't know where he had been born. He just knew he didn't want to be with them. So one night he slips away, he escapes, and he starts wandering all over Europe. He doesn't know exactly where he's going. He doesn't know which direction. But he remembers that bell. You see, he remembers that bell. So every town he finds along the way, he stays and he listens to the church bell. And it's not it. That's not the one he remembers. So he keeps on his journey. He keeps on his quest. He keeps moving, you see. And one day he is walking up this hill. And as he approaches the top of the hill, he starts to hear this bell. He starts to hear this bell ring. And he stops. And he listens. And his heart quickens. And he starts to run up the hill because this is the sound he remembered as a little boy when he was being carried away from the village. And he gets up to the top of the hill and he looks down into the valley and he sees the church steeple and he hears the bell ringing, and it all comes back to him. This is his town. This is where he belongs. And what Howard is telling us is that within each and every one of us, there is that which knows our rightful place, which knows our true place. And there is that within us which moves us forward at the time that's right for us. And it may have us seek in different places, and we may not know exactly how and what we're looking for. But when we rediscover it, we know. So that is the power of the symbolism. That is the power of the imagery in the story. You see, we'll remember that. We'll remember that story probably for the rest of our lives. We will remember that story. That we are that little boy. We are that person who is seeking. We are that person who knows that they should seek. And we know that there's an inner guide within us that leads us on the way. This is the quest. This is the quest. So we read these stories of the Knights of the Round Table, and we might at first think that they're entertaining stories about life in medieval times in England, but they're more than that, you see. They are mythology. They are symbols, because each and every one of us is the knight. Each and every one of us is on a quest. And the Holy Grail that we are looking for is not the carpenter's cup. The Holy Grail that we are looking for is the presence of the divine within us. The divine life, we live within the divine life. The divine life has created us out of itself. And we live within it, and it lives within us. And point where that divine life becomes human as us, that is the Holy Grail. That is the presence. That is the Christ within us. And we are each seeking that. That is our destiny. That is what we have been born to discover. That is the church bell that is ringing inside of us and calling us home. But as Wendy gave us in the opening quote, we don't know that, you see. So we look everywhere else. We look everywhere else. We look out there. We look in the stars. We look in the heavens. We look everywhere else until we learn to look within. We look within. There's another parable that comes to us from the East that says, when the gods created men, human beings, when the gods created human beings, they had something that was very, very valuable that they wanted to withhold from the humans. And the gods had this little discussion about where they should hide it. And one said, well, let's put it up on top of the tallest mountain peak. And the other said, no, that won't work, because human beings are a curious lot, and they will eventually explore every inch of the planet. They will eventually explore every mountain peak just because they're there, and they will find it. And another one said, well, let's put it then at the deepest spot in the ocean. And the God said, no, they're a clever lot. They'll somehow figure out, they'll build machines that'll take them to the deepest spot of the ocean, and eventually they will find it there too. And then one of the gods had a brilliant idea. He said, let's hide it within them, because that is the last place that they will look. Another symbol, another story telling us that the quest that we are on, that you and I are on, is an inward journey, not an external journey. But it follows, or it can follow at least, the template that we get from Campbell, the template that we get from Aristotle. In that there is this awakening. There is this awakening within us, just like the little shepherd boy who had this awakening that he could leave, he could go home. We find ourselves in this human experience, but we realize that we are more than humans, you see. Make that discovery. It's like people who have gone before. There are people who will say, now when you get here, when you get to this spot on your journey, this is what's likely to happen. And this is what you need to do. And then we begin, and we begin in earnest. We set out on our quest, you see. We set out on our quest. And then like the knights of the round table, like the heroes in the hero's journey, we have obstacles that we meet along the way. We have things that come up that we must overcome. We must work through. We must integrate and assimilate until we arrive. And I think this idea of integration and assimilation, I think this is very important for us to keep in mind on our journey, because what tends to happen is we might decide, well, we're human beings with a soul. You see, that's what we are. Or we're just human beings. We're just flesh and blood. And nothing else matters too much, because when the flesh and blood dies, it's all over. Or we might decide that we are primarily flesh and blood, and we happen to have a spiritual aspect called a soul. And we might start to grow to the point where we say, no, you see, I am a spiritual being. I am primarily a spiritual being who is expressing life in this physical form, as this physical form. But the spirit is more important than the body. Now, some of the ancient people today, you know, the ascetics, they tried to deny the flesh. They tried to deny the body. The flesh was the enemy. You see, the flesh was what was keeping the soul from experiencing its totality or its greatness. And the flesh had to be suppressed. It had to be put down. It had to be tamed. And they were at war with themselves, you see. So sometimes we do this. We start to grow spiritually. We want to forget about the totality of what we are. And that is just the flip side of the coin, as the mystics would tell us, you know. So one side says, spirit, and the flesh is bad, and the flesh is the illusion. The other side says, no, I am flesh, spirit is the illusion. There's only flesh. And the two are equally confused, because we are all of the above. We are all of the above. In the beginning, I jokingly quoted Walter Starkey, but his book makes a great point. It's all God, the fertilizer and the roses. So our quest then is to experience more of our spiritual nature without struggling against everything else that we have experienced, without struggling against everything else that we are. In Jungian psychology, they might say, embrace the shadow. Right? You know, find the energy, find the power that's in the dark side. Now, the reason for that is if we are trying to deny that, if we are trying to ignore that, we are wasting a tremendous amount of energy in trying to pretend it's not there. But when we can assimilate it, when we can integrate it, you see, when we can be a total being, we can be a spiritual being in a human experience, then we bring the fullness of who and what we are into our lives. So fortunately, we can step up and recognize we are on this quest. And you and I, each and every one of us, each and every day, we are writing another chapter in our quest for the Holy Grail. Now, unfortunately, many days the chapter would be very boring. You know, what did you do today to advance your quest for the Holy Grail? Well, you know, I get up, I went to work, came home, I watched TV, I went to bed. You know, But we have a choice, you see, because we are the screenwriters of our own life. We don't have to just observe our life. We don't have to just take things as they come, writing the script for us as if we were just actors in the play. But we can choose, see, and that is the most important thing that we can do is we can choose. Because once we choose, once we set our intention, as we talked in the last couple of weeks, once we set our intention, I think it was Great that said, it's like an invisible power comes to our aid, you see, and things start to fall into place. We would call that the law of mind. It is done unto us according to our belief. So hopefully we are at the point now where we can recognize that we each have this quest, we each have this call, we each have to go find the source of that bell that's ringing inside of us, that's calling us forward. Where are we going to look for it and how, you see? And this again is where we have to avoid being distracted, being entertained, being caught up in something else. Because there's no shortage of people who will tell you, for $400 and one weekend, I can give you the answer. There's no shortage of apps to put on your phone that will purport to give you spiritual growth. And I'm not saying they're all bad, and I'm not saying that there's not a time and a place for all things. But that's not the real work, you see. That can become entertainment. That can become a distraction. It can become like watching exercise videos and never exercising. Now we may get technique, we may get instruction, but at some point we have to do it ourselves. So where then are we going to find this Holy Grail? Where then are we going to meet the presence of the divine? And the answer is everywhere. Everywhere. It is in all things. It is everywhere present. It is the fertilizer. It is the roses. But we cannot meet it everywhere until we have met it within our own selves. Jesus said, go within. Go to the prayer closet within. Meet the Father within. This is his way of saying it is within. The presence is within. And we have all of the tools that we need to do that. Because, and Dr. Holmes says this in a textbook, we will only find the divine by finding it first within ourselves. So what do you know about yourself, you see? What do you know? What do you know about thought? What do you know about this stuff that goes on in your mind? How much time do you spend alone just reflecting what is going on in there, not being stimulated by what is going on out there, And it's hard. I mean, I'm sitting here, we've got beautiful sunshine, beautiful green trees, sunflowers are blooming. But how much time do we take to go within? If you think about our society, the greatest fear we seem to have is death, and that is the greatest punishment we have for any crime, the death penalty. But the second greatest penalty is the second greatest thing we fear, which is being alone. Being alone, solitary confinement. And some people would rather die than be alone. Why are we afraid to be alone? Why is it that when we have an opportunity to be alone, we want to turn on the TV or pick up a book? Why is it? Why is it that we avoid that? That is our quest. That is our quest. So the place to start, of course, is first of all the realization that there's a magnificent adventure that you and I are on. Magnificent. It is greater than any tale of any knight of any round table. It is greater than any hero's journey that was ever written, because it is your hero's journey. But you must write it. You must write it. You must become an active participant, not a vicarious participant, okay? Not someone who is just watching as a prying observer participant, but as the director, as the actor, as the one who sets the intention and then lets it unfold. Meditation, and the type of meditation I'm talking about here, is just the meditation of being alone, of being quiet, and observing the activity of your mind. That is it. That is it. I'm not talking about listening to music or any of those things. They're all good. That's not what I'm talking about here. Can you simply sit and be and count from 1 to 5 so that your consciousness has kind of an anchor to hold it? Be aware of your breath coming in and out, but be aware of the activity, what we would call thought, or the activity of mind. Even though we don't know what thought is or what mind is, that's what we call it. Be aware of the chatter, you see. Because the true self that we are looking for, the self with a capital S, getting to know your authentic self, getting to know your true self, the true self is beyond that noise, beyond that chatter. You remember a few months ago I talked about in the summertime we turn on the room fan and the blades are spinning so fast you can see right through them, but if you try to stick something in there, it's going to get chopped. The activity of the monkey mind is like the fan blades spinning around that are preventing us from getting through to the other side. That is our quest. Those are the obstacles to be overcome. The guides have gone before us, right? Buddha said if everyone did this one meditation, they could use it and they could get to enlightenment. And that was simply to breathe in and observe the gap before the breath turns out, and breathe out and observe the gap before the breath turns in. Sounds very simple. Can you keep your attention focused on that? See, because when we do that, when we can do that, then we realize that there is a thought, and then there is a gap. And then there's another thought, and then there's another gap. And it is in those gaps, like a fan that has stopped spinning, the gap between the blades you can get through. In those gaps, we start to experience our authentic self. What we find when we get to that place is that this illusion of separateness that we have starts to dissolve. Now, another practice that I will give you, and I will close with this today, is love. All of the great teachers have told us love. And why is love a good practice? Because that which we love, we feel one with. We feel one with. And that which we can't love, we feel separated from. And if God is all there is, the fertilizer and the roses, the good bad people as we would label them, then the presence of the divine is within each and every one. If we can't see it in another, it is our opportunity to grow. One way that we do that is, what is it about that person that I don't like about myself? Are they just a reflection of my own divided self? As we learn to love unconditionally, as we learn to not take our thoughts so seriously because they're only fleeting ideas, as we read and study what the guides who have gone before us and told us to do, and we put them into practice, our quest unfolds. our journey unfolds. So what I invite you to do today is to recognize that you are the author of your quest for the Holy Grail. And ask yourself if the story that you're writing engages you. Don't worry about anybody else yet. Does it engage you? Does it draw you in? Are you interested in it? You know, are you waiting to turn the page to see what happens next? Or are you just letting other people and other things in life put something on your plate that you then deal with? You're the only one in charge of your life. You're the only one in charge of the growth of your soul. You're the only one in charge of this story of your quest. I ask you today to consider whether you could be more committed to that story. Could you be more interested in that story? If you're not sure where to go next, could you seek out the guides or the books or the teachers who say, you know, when you're just starting out, this is what it might look like. Or when you're halfway through, this is what it might look like. Or when you get to the end, this is what it might look like. And if you get here and you think this, you're not there. You just think you're there. Sometimes I think the game of chutes and ladders is a good metaphor for our spiritual growth. We think we're making progress, and we say, oh no, I didn't have that right at all. Every time I think I've got it, I realize I don't. But that's our growth. That realization is our growth. So I invite you today, commit yourself to your quest. Close your eyes. Be still. Listen to the sound of that bell that's ringing within you, that's calling you home. Say to yourself, I'm going to start in earnest if you haven't already. And if you have started in earnest, I am going to start with more commitment, with more enthusiasm. I'm going to take it up a notch. I don't care if I've got to go to every city in the world and listen to the bell. I don't care if where I am going now, if the path I am taking now is not the ultimate path, but it's good in that I learn something as I'm on it, and I grow as I am on it. And doing it reaffirms my commitment to my ultimate destiny. You see, each and every one of us ultimately will make the discovery. That's inevitable. But when we get on the path is up to us. As the poet said, the divine is lying in sweet repose, quiet repose, waiting for our recognition of it. Let today be the day we begin the quest in earnest. And so it is.